They didn't run because of indifference. They ran because the intensity of their emotions overwhelmed their psychological defenses. When you stopped chasing, their internal world began to collapse. While most people push avoidance away through desperation, your rare response reached their deepest subconscious, making your memory inescapable, even if they pretend to the world that they have moved on. If you've loved someone emotionally distant, ask yourself, did they stop caring? Or did their fear simply override their expression of love? While avoidants initially feel relief when distance is created, it is a surface-level mask for deep-seated anxiety. They expect you to react with anger or pursuit. That predictable pattern allows them to focus on your neediness rather than their own internal fear. If you're ready to understand the silent psychological battle an avoidant faces, hit like so this message reaches those seeking clarity. By refusing to chase, you shattered their protective framework. Without your emotional noise to distract them, they were forced into a painful confrontation with their own loneliness. Your silence created a vacuum where your absence suddenly felt much heavier than your presence ever was. Your refusal to chase communicated that your love stems from wholeness and self-respect rather than dependency. To someone who fears being suffocated, this independent energy is dangerously attractive and rare. What affected them most was the feeling that you could see past the false persona they show the world. Avoidant individuals spend years building emotional armor, hiding vulnerability behind masks of logic, sarcasm, or distance. While they appear controlled and unaffected to others, they are often hiding deep loneliness and unresolved fear. Most people either feel intimidated by this mask or become obsessed with breaking it down. But your stability reached the soft parts they work so hard to protect. Comment strength if you've ever chosen your own dignity over the urge to chase someone. You responded to their walls differently than anyone else, recognizing the fear behind their contradictions rather than judging their inconsistency. Because avoidants are rarely understood correctly, your ability to see their retreats as a defense mechanism rather than a lack of love created a profound emotional impact. Being truly known is both an avoidant's greatest desire and their deepest fear. By quietly understanding their heart without shaming their defenses, you provided a level of safety they weren't prepared for. This vulnerability created a bond they couldn't escape simply by walking away, which is why you remain in their thoughts long after the distance grew. Your presence reached beneath their survival persona, touching a part of them they usually protect at all costs. You offered them the one thing they value most: freedom without abandonment. Most avoidants associate love with pressure and control, causing them to retreat the moment they feel stifled. With you, the dynamic was different. You cared deeply without becoming possessive, allowing them space without responding with coldness or punishment. By respecting their independence while remaining emotionally present, you became a rare source of safety, making it nearly impossible for them to forget the unique connection you provided. You did not demand constant reassurance or explanations every single time they became quiet or chose to be emotionally withdrawn. Instead of making the relationship your entire identity, you maintained your own sense of self, your own hobbies, and your own life. That internal balance affected them more than they ever admitted openly to you, while the relationship was still active and close. Avoidant people secretly admire individuals who can love them deeply without clinging to them or becoming desperate for their time. To them, your emotional independence feels safe because it removes the deep-seated fear of being consumed by someone else's heavy needs. Type yes if you want me to reveal the exact psychological triggers that make them miss you the most. When they noticed that your happiness did not completely depend on controlling their attention, they slowly began lowering their guards. Your calmness allowed them to experience true intimacy without immediately associating it with the danger of losing their own autonomy. That unique experience stays inside their memory long after the relationship has changed or the two of you have moved apart. They begin comparing every other person they meet to the emotional freedom and the lack of pressure they felt when they were with you. Most connections they find either feel way too distant or way too demanding for their sensitive nervous system to handle. But your energy existed in a very rare middle ground that offered them affection without chains and closeness without any pressure. You gave them understanding without emotional imprisonment, and for someone who fears being trapped, that kind of bond is unforgettable. What made you stand out was your emotional consistency, as avoidants are far more sensitive to instability than most people realize. Even though they appear detached on the outside, internally they are constantly scanning for signs of pressure or unpredictable behavior. Many of them grew up in environments where love felt inconsistent and where closeness could suddenly turn into criticism or guilt. Because of that background, they developed a habit of protecting themselves by staying emotionally guarded whenever a relationship feels unstable. But your energy felt different because you did not constantly swing between emotional extremes or use games to get what you wanted. You did not use passive aggression or manipulation to force them to give you the reassurance you might have needed in the moment. Even during the times when they became distant or difficult to understand, you remained emotionally grounded instead of reacting impulsively. That steadiness slowly created a sense of safety inside their nervous system that they were not used to feeling. At first, they may not have fully understood why being around you felt so calming to their normally anxious and guarded mind. Avoidants are often disconnected from their own emotional needs, so they do not immediately recognize when someone is helping them. But over time, your consistency began lowering their internal defenses and making them feel like they could finally take a breath. They stopped feeling like they constantly needed to prepare for a fight or for a sudden emotional demand they could not meet. Your presence became associated with a feeling of peace rather than a feeling of pressure. And that is where deep attachment grows. Emotionally distant people secretly crave stability because internal chaos is incredibly exhausting for them to maintain every single day. When someone consistently brings calmness into their world, the connection begins to settle into places that are far deeper than temporary attraction. Even after you have separated, they continue to remember how safe it felt to be in your presence without being judged. Once an avoidant connects a person with emotional peace, their mind keeps returning to that person again and again in their thoughts. One of the deepest reasons they attached to you was because you did not treat them like a problem that needed fixing. Most avoidant people carry a heavy amount of secret shame about the way they struggle with intimacy and emotional closeness. They are fully aware that they can become distant or confusing, and they have seen many people respond to them with frustration. Many people in their past have tried to force them to change or criticize them for not being more emotionally available. That kind of pressure only serves to strengthen their defenses, because it confirms their fear that they are fundamentally flawed. But you responded differently by allowing them the space to exist exactly as they were, without trying to fix or change them. Share this video to help someone else stop draining their energy on an emotionally unavailable connection. You listen to their words without immediately trying to correct their perspective or highlight their faults to make them feel small. You observe their emotional contradictions without turning every single quiet moment into a massive confrontation or a psychological debate. That does not mean you accepted bad behavior, but your energy carried a sense of understanding rather than a desire for domination. For someone who spends most of their life feeling misunderstood, that kind of radical acceptance is incredibly powerful and rare. Avoidants often expect people to love only the perfect, polished version of themselves, and to reject the parts that are afraid. They believe their fears and their need for distance make them difficult to love or keep in a long-term relationship. So when they encounter someone who sees those flaws and stays anyway, something inside their heart begins to soften and change. Your acceptance weakened the defensive identity they had built for survival, and they no longer felt they had to perform perfection. Ironically, this lack of pressure created more internal change within them than any amount of force or begging ever could. Real emotional transformation only happens when a person finally feels safe enough to stop hiding behind their tall walls. Your patients created special moments where they could lower their armor without the fear of being humiliated or mocked for their feelings. Once an avoidant person associates you with relief from their internal shame, walking away becomes much harder than they ever expected. Even after a long time has passed, they continue to remember how rare it felt to be accepted as a whole person. The moment that stayed with them the most was when you finally chose yourself and walked away with quiet dignity. Avoidants often assume that the people who love them will just wait forever, no matter how much distance they create. If this deeper look into their fear of intimacy shocked you, comment "truth" below. Because they struggle to process their emotions in real time, they frequently underestimate how much their behavior hurts the people they love. They convince themselves that there will always be more time in the future to fix things or to reconnect when they feel better. But when you slowly stepped away without bitterness, something inside their mind became deeply unsettled and worried. You did not try to destroy them or beg them to stay, but instead, you recognized your own worth and stopped sacrificing. That calm withdrawal affected them far more than a loud argument or a dramatic scene ever could have in that moment. Suddenly, they were faced with the cold reality of losing the one person who actually understood their complicated inner world. Because avoidants often suppress their feelings until distance creates clarity, the emotional weight of the loss hits them much later. Your absence became psychologically louder than your presence had been, and small memories of your time together started to surface. They remembered the way you listened without judgment, and the patience you showed them during their darkest and most distant moments. They began realizing that what you offered them was a rare gift that is impossible to ignore once it has disappeared. What haunts an avoidant person the most is not emotional chaos, but the loss of someone who loved them without trying to control them. Your dignity forced them to confront all the emotions they had spent the entire relationship trying to avoid and ignore. Once that realization fully reaches their heart, they often discover that replacing your presence is far more difficult than they imagined. Another reason they fell so deeply for you is that you did not force a level of intensity before they were ready. Most people move way too fast when they are dealing with someone who is emotionally distant and guarded. They demand immediate vulnerability and constant reassurance before the avoidant nervous system feels safe enough to give those things. That kind of external pressure creates a sense of internal panic and makes them want to run as fast as they can. Even when they genuinely like someone, they will retreat if the speed of the relationship feels threatening to their safety. But you approached the connection with a sense of patience and allowed things to unfold naturally over a period of time. You understood that trust is built through repeated moments of safety and consistency rather than loud declarations of love. That patience removed the fear of being emotionally consumed, and it gave them the necessary room to breathe and think. Ironically, that freedom made them want to lower their defenses much faster than if you had tried to pull them down. Avoidant people are drawn to those who do not aggressively pursue intimacy, because it makes connection feel like a choice. The less trapped they feel, the more emotionally curious and open they become toward the person they are with. Over time, your patient approach created something rare inside of their heart, which was trust without the presence of fear. They started associating your presence with emotional safety, and that feeling entered the deepest parts of their attachment system. Even if they struggled to say the words, they began feeling connected in a way they could not easily disconnect from later. This is why avoidants often become unexpectedly obsessed with the people who never tried to rush or force them into anything. Your ability to let love develop at its own pace communicated a level of maturity and security that they had never seen. In a world of instant demands, your calm nature made the connection feel genuine and impossible for them to forget. What ultimately made you unforgettable was the emotional imprint you left behind in the silence of your absence. Avoidants rarely process the full meaning of a relationship while it is happening because they are busy detaching to stay safe. But once the intensity of the daily interaction fades away, their true emotional awareness begins to rise to the surface. In your absence, they did not find the peace they were looking for. Instead, they found a deep and heavy reflection. Small moments began replaying in their mind without warning, and ordinary conversations suddenly gained a huge amount of emotional weight. They remembered how you stayed grounded even when they were pulling away, and these details became unresolved emotional signals. Absence reveals what presence often hides, and when you were no longer there was nothing to distract them from their feelings. What you made them feel was a rare combination of safety and depth that they are not used to experiencing with others. That realization arrives quietly and slowly as their mind starts comparing every new person they meet to the space you created. Others may give them attention, but it never feels the same, because the emotional safety is missing. You became a permanent reference point in their internal world, and a standard that they cannot easily erase from their mind. They return to you in their thoughts again and again because you made them feel both safe and seen at the same time. Avoidant love is not an absence of feeling, but a difficulty in holding on to that feeling without being afraid of the consequences. They do not move away because they are cold, but because they are touched by something they do not yet know how to heal. When someone like you enters their life and offers love without pressure, they finally encounter something truly life-changing. They may misread your calm energy at first and think that distance will protect them from the depth of their feelings, but over time, their silence turns into reflection, and that reflection turns into the recognition of what they have lost. They see that you were not trying to trap them, but were simply trying to understand and respect their boundaries. What they ran from was not you, but the intense depth of what they felt when they were standing in your presence. In the end, they return to the thought of you because you represent peace and emotional freedom within a connection. If this deeper look into their fear of intimacy shocked you, comment "truth" below. The final truth is that you were never meant to chase them into seeing how much you are worth as a partner. You were meant to reveal your worth through your absence, your dignity, and your ability to stay balanced. Once someone experiences a love that does not abandon itself, even an avoidant mind cannot fully delete that memory. They may leave, and they may resist the pull, but they will always remember the way you made them feel. In that remembering, they realize the rarest love is the one that knows when to let go without losing its value. Comment which of these 6 shifts changed your perspective most, and subscribe to reclaim your emotional power.